I could be inventing the story, but didn't Australia kill or try to kill Johnny Depp's dog that he snuck into the country?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was in Colombia when that was happening. I recall the kerfuffle that happened at the time. I'm not sure the killing was ever on the I don't think killing was ever on the table. That sounds like some creative license. But yeah, there was some issue where Johnny was like, "What's wrong with my little pooch?" And then why can't I bring it in? And then yeah, there was some issue. Private. How good would it be to have a private jet? I say that, but I don't really know. But I'm just bracing myself for the same old bullshit as we've discussed before of going to the airport and all that jazz. But imagine your own little thing you could just control. I'm never going to work
That,
hard enough to get a private jet, so it's futile me even fantasizing about it. But anyway,
that's one luxury I would love. Because think about it, if I were to, live in California again, even if I had a great car, whatever fucking car anyone wants these days, I'm out of it. Sorry, whatever, like Ferrari or Bugatti, it's still California traffic I'm gonna have to deal with. I'm not getting to point A or from point A to point B that much faster. But a private jet, as we discussed, no one fucking likes flying. It's a goddamn nightmare. So if you could just like make that one aspect of it that much easier, yeah, that would be nice. I mean, neither of us are gonna have one, so this is depressing.
yeah.
You
Well,
fuck it, you might.
yeah, we'll see. Well, I just don't another thing that I've never understood. I'm not sure if you followed the recent death of Anne Hesh and the actress. Did you follow her death?
Not quite. I mean, I'm aware she died. I don't know any more of the details, really.
Well, yeah, the essentially I think she'd been long long sorry, for a long time she's been struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, and I think for the last 5 or so years it got bad again. And she did a podcast on the day she died. I shouldn't laugh, but where she was like slurring and she was like drinking champagne and vodka live on air, and then she like drove herself. I don't know where she was going, but that's when she had the crash. And apparently there's footage of her. I haven't looked it up. I haven't felt that need, but yeah, where her body gets pulled out of the car and she's like all burnt up. Yeah, and I think she lived for like, she was kept alive for a week or so longer, and then eventually they turned off life support. But yeah, just a weird story in that there's like, I don't think the podcast episode has been released, or maybe it was released and they took it down. But yeah, she was just kind of out of it drunk. The reason I bring it up is that one thing I've never understood: once you get to a certain level of fame or notoriety, or even just dollars in the bank, why would you drive yourself anywhere at that point? Like, why wouldn't you just have a 24-hour chauffeur which would allow you to get loaded as much as you possibly want? I guess probably herein lies my answer, is that Anne Heche's career fell off a cliff and she probably didn't have the money to afford a chauffeur any longer. But for the super rich, I would just have someone on call. I reckon actually that's a kind of funny premise for a story, like a relationship between a driver and a really fucked up super rich or high status celebrity, just kind of their dynamic. This guy who has to drive him around at all hours of the day. But anyway, that would be my life if I was high. I'd never get caught drink driving. I'd probably be drunk all the time, but I'd never fucking drive because someone else could do that.
Yeah, honestly, like if I had I say this now, if I had money beyond what I'm used to, if I somehow I won the lottery and I'm rich all of a sudden. There's not much that I want. Like I really don't give a shit about cars or material things. I spend most of my money on books anyways. So like just to have a chauffeur so I don't have to worry about that aspect of life. That's kind of like the main thing. So if I did go on a bender, I wouldn't have to worry about it. Or if I wanted to, pick a trip somewhere, it's like, well, Benedict or whatever his name is, he's British and my imagination is going to take me there.
Yeah. Would you ever buy a wife?
Well, nice segue. Um, Spoilers, no, I would not. And I think that will be abundantly clear why I wouldn't by the end of this podcast. Um, I don't even know where to start with this one, other than there was a period a couple years ago where I was obsessed with documentaries about this phenomenon. I don't know if you've ever seen Love Me. I think it's either on Netflix or Amazon about Ukrainian mail order brides.
I'm not sure. The one that you sent me, the second YouTube video of that big rotund government worker, the video gamer guy who went and this is Julia, isn't she stunning? She looks like Angelina Jolie in this one.
Yeah,
I've seen the whole documentary from whatever that one is from.
I believe it.
That's Love Me, is it?
I believe it is. And there's a better one that has since disappeared off the face of the earth. And I could only imagine that someone involved, like years down the line, filed a lawsuit or threatened to take it down. It was a National Geographic one, and this one was in Russia, and this was years back. And this one was phenomenal. And there might be like a 2-minute clip at most on YouTube somewhere, but it's gone no matter how hard I try to find it. And there was guys on there who are like 3-timers, 4-timers. They're on their fourth mail order bride. And come on, man, if it didn't work 3 times, it's not gonna work. Like it's just not happening for you. Try a different tactic, buddy.
Yeah, I recall watching that documentary. I actually feel I have a memory of me. I got to the end of that documentary. I think I was watching it on a particularly after a particularly large weekend on like a Sunday afternoon, and I remember crying at the end of it, but because it was something to do with one of the Eastern European women. She was saying goodbye to her family because she was about to go marry someone she didn't fucking like. And I remember just being the abject sadness of it getting to me, where her family and friends were understanding of her decision to go take this opportunity, if you'd call it that. But yet there was still this just kind of this sense of loss, which was just just so fucking sad. And I guess what's interesting about this topic is that you can either see both sides, the guys buying the brides and the brides themselves, as opportunistic and kind of cunning, or in the same breath, it's sad as fuck from both directions. And I think that's why it's kind of compelling, because that rotund gamer guy, for example, it's hard to see him as someone as anything else but a victim. But then there's other stories of the guys on their third or fourth mail order bride is probably an indication that they're either getting taken for a ride, or that they are just completely impossible to live with, and total cunts. That's why they have to keep cycling through a bunch of different women.
Well, there's so much to unpack here, and it is sad. Like these documentaries, you kind of start watching them for the cringe factor. It's like 90 Day Fiancé. That show became hugely popular. You watch it, people on the show become memes. But for me, it becomes deeply sad very quickly, where I kind of want to just stay away from the internet for a week, take a couple cold showers, and just remove myself from humanity. However, I'm kind of addicted to this topic because human loneliness is a real thing, and I don't think it should be like taken lightly. And the men more so than the women. The women, you could kind of understand the desperation of their situation financially, socially, politically, whatever. Whereas the men, people kind of roll their eyes and say, "Oh, these guys are a bunch of losers. They can't find love in their own country. Like, how pathetic." And that is true, but that doesn't make it not sad.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I spoke to this guy who his YouTube name is The Good Farang, which in Thai basically means like the good foreigner. which which is kind of a funny name. But I actually do think he's a good guy. But it's funny branding to be like, I'm one of the good guys. And anyway, he went over there and he was just kind of like a solo traveler type of guy, vlogger. And then he fell in love with a Thai woman and got married, and now she's living over in Ireland with him. And so I did a podcast with Paul, and I got to ask him, yeah, what's the deal with kind of the whole concept of older Western guys going over there looking for companionship and just like how is it seen over there? And he said that in Thai culture they just kind of understand it's like a transactional thing where they're often these women who are either going to be working in massage parlors or like prostitutes, and then I guess to a lesser degree maybe the women looking to be taken as wives, they're often like single mothers or in dire straits financially. So even though it's not something that you'd like bring up, but yeah, everyone kind of understands what they're doing. But Thai people are kind of like, it's a customer service culture and stuff like that. So it seems like there is at least in terms of the culture, I guess it's probably because it's got like a Buddhist influence. They want to be kind and helpful and, show good service to other people. And doesn't mean that there isn't like financial manipulation going on and all that. But it got me thinking from the stories that you sent through to me and the revisiting those documentaries, how do Eastern European societies at large look at those Americans who are on that tour bus, or the women who are kind of there to try and milk them dry? Is there a similar kind of understanding of the transactional aspect akin to the Thai culture, or is it more kind of like sneered at and seen as kind of disgusting?
Oh man, so this kills me to say anything that could kind of paint Ukraine in a bad light, but if you arrive in Kyiv and you take a car from the airport to take you to the city, some of the first billboards you see are for strip clubs, massage parlors, advertising their merchandise, advertising what they have, like what they know many foreigners are coming there for. Women, they're very much aware of their image as like a sex tourist destination, and they're flaunting it. I mean, I stayed in an Airbnb in the city center, and one of the most prominent buildings there is called Harem's Men's Club. Like, it's not hidden, it's right there. People know what it is. So I'm losing my train of thought here as to
so
whether
how do
they
the
see
normies
as,
like so
right.
it seems like it's prevalent, but like if you're just a normie, right, you're someone who's managed, you're a woman who's married to a Ukrainian guy, average middle class person, what does that kind of median person in society think of that whole industry in Ukraine?
So I feel like people like us kind of have to remove ourselves from the situations just for the fact that we've lived abroad for extended period of time. We've lived in different places. So I'm trying to look through the lens of someone who doesn't have that experience. So if I'm an average Ukrainian and I meet an American in Kyiv, I might think it's a little weird because this isn't the biggest tourist destination. People don't come here willy-nilly. There must be a reason. And as a Ukrainian or a Russian or, someone from that part of the world, you don't expect that a foreigner who's coming to your country knows your language or is learning your language or has an actual interest in your history or your society. They're there. Well, what do we have? They're there for women. This isn't Paris. This isn't Tokyo. There must be like some kind of ulterior motive. And you run into that. Either that or you're a spy. If they meet a Western who is there, like, well, what the fuck are you doing here? You're a spy, obviously. And so there is an awareness that, our country has beautiful women, many beautiful women. And we've heard that American women are disgusting. Like, these are their words. Like, oh, we heard they're not so good looking and that people come here to find wives. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, they do that. So I can't really argue that that's not happening. This is where things get weird, though. There's plenty of like authentic, natural relationships that develop from Westerners who come to Ukraine. They've lived there for an extended period of time. They respect the culture. They're, they actually have motivation to be there. And well, if you're gonna date someone, chances are they're probably Ukrainian. That's where you live. And so it's not that like, oh, I have a Ukrainian fetish. I just happen to be living here, and I'm dating someone who's Ukrainian. Incidentally. But that doesn't mean the alternative isn't also happening. I mean, I've seen it with my eyes. I haven't seen any of these mail order bride tours. So there's really two types of, at least that I'm aware of mail order bride programs. There's like these packaged tours where a bunch of Americans, Aussies, Brits get on a bus and they go from city to city and they pay an insane amount of money to the organizers. And it's kind of like speed dating or social gatherings. So the women pay nothing. They're just there. And, the men meet them. They go from woman to woman, talk to them, and then they decide which one they like best and who they'd like to keep in touch with. And they
often through a translator as well. So it's incredibly stilted and awkward, the communication, where it's like, I think I'm falling for this girl, and it's just some random dude or chick in between them translating everything.
It's incredibly uncomfortable. And then the other one is there's like a catalog on a website where the man has to pay per message he sends. I believe he has to pay to sign up, and he has to pay for every email he sends. And this one's even, they're both shady, but this one in particular, I've heard that on some of these sites, something like only 5% of the women on there are actually real. The rest are stock images or images of models. Sometimes you're just talking to some 18-year-old college student, some dude who's answering the messages using these women's profiles. And in the case of the guy we talked about earlier, the one, the gamer, the dude who was like in his late 40s or 50s, who thought he was talking to Angelina Jolie, he spent upwards to $10,000 just on email exchange. That's before he even flew out to Ukraine. And so that's the amount of money he spent just on correspondence with a woman he hadn't even met face to face yet. And then when he flew out there to take part in the tour part of it, she ghosted him several times. Shockingly, she actually did show up. She was real. But he had tried to meet her a lot of times while there, and she kept ghosting him before she finally did. And it didn't work out for him. Like, eventually she's just like, no, fuck this, like, weird bad dude. I don't want to marry him.
Yeah. Yeah, just kind of revisiting that doco, it made me think about there's just something kind of particularly cruel about the marriage component. Like, I'm a pretty open-minded person, and I don't really have a problem with prostitution in the fact that as long as no one is being manipulated to be there, and even that gets blurry because, for example, in Colombia, there are still some regions which are kind of like controlled by paramilitary groups where they're essentially kind of like mob bosses which run entire towns. And you hear stories of young women, and oftentimes girls are kind of like essentially kidnapped and taken to the major cities and put into sexual slavery. So if you're just a random John going to a brothel there and thinking like, no, I'm going to wear a rubber and I just want to get my rocks off and I want to like, pay for that. In theory, if it's like a woman who's of age, who's brought herself into that situation, then I don't really see an issue with it. If it's someone who's been kind of coerced into being there, and it's fucked up because you don't really necessarily, that that particular woman, she might not realize she's been coerced until years later. So
That's where things, because in theory, I agree. If it's a transaction between two consenting adults, why the hell not? Like, really, why not? And even in Amsterdam, where it's legal, things get shady there because, surprise, surprise, a lot of the women in the red light district are from Eastern Europe, post-Soviet countries. And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe it's legal, but are they necessarily there by choice, or did they think they were getting into something else? And for every one that is there by choice is like, yeah, this is what I chose to do. It's a way to make a quick buck or a quick euro. There might be two or three more who thought they were gonna get jobs as like an au pair or like as a nanny or working in a restaurant or as a model. It's one of those things where it's kind of impossible to fucking tell, which makes it that gray. Because again, in theory, I'm all on board, make it legal. But with mail order brides, how, I don't know.
Well, that's what I was gonna get to. It's just that the most harrowing parts of those documentaries are when the women are in the home country, that they fly back with the man, like that poor lady who had to go to that horrible part of England with that disgusting looking man. Yeah. With his like really shitty house, and just the fact that she was like, okay, maybe this is like a slight upgrade from where I am, but not by much, because he was a fucking blacksmith or something, some type of 17th century occupation and in like the worst part of England. And so that's when the kind of like and so watching this whole documentary, it kind of made me I was like, dudes, why don't you just go over there multiple times a year, have your fun, and then just like fucking be alone for the other few months. Don't subject. So it's kind of like getting a fucking, I don't know, like, because they can't communicate with, it's almost like there's an animal in the house, like a pet that you're neglecting or something, and the dog and the pet doesn't like the owner, and the owner is slowly beginning to resent the pet because it's not playing nice with them. It's like, it's this weird kind of like, it makes complete sense why there would be violent escalations in these situations.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're willing to pay 10 grand just to send emails, dude, pay $40 to get some like ratchet hoe to jerk you off and like be done with it.
Yes.
Seriously. What's that? Post-nut clarity? I mean, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
Like, you might not be happy, but you might wake up and be like, fuck, what was I about to do?
But here's where it's confusing though, because like you and I, we're in our 30s, right? And we, at least my understanding, I guess we've still kind of got that like teenage 20 something, I guess, hangover where you're just like, it's all about getting your rocks off. It's not necessarily about companionship. But, I think once men get to middle age, there is this kind of pathetic realization that kicks in where they're like, I need someone to take care of me as I'm getting older. And I don't want to meet someone who's already got their own baggage and kids from a past marriage. I just want to get someone who's 20 years younger than me, who's going to be like able-bodied and like, and so trying to play devil's advocate, like, because in my head, I'm like, yeah, get the ratchet hoe, get her multiple times a week if you need, and like get a nice one and just be pleasant to her, and then she can leave. Like I recall when I was in my early 20s, when I was working in this office, this guy who was kind of like I think he was in his late 30s by that point. He was perpetually single, and he just met someone, and he was like really proud that he met someone and was like clearly hoping for big things from this relationship. And he was, I said, oh, how was your night last night? One boring morning at the office. And he was like, oh yeah, it was good. I went to my soccer practice or whatever, and then got home a bit late, but so-and-so was like, Jess was already in the bed, so man, I got to get into a nice warm bed. And I was like, oh, nice warm bed. Ugh. Like, that's fucking disgusting. You don't want that. You want to kick her out. Like, you want to use her and then get rid of her. But I was like, at a certain point, there is like a companionship, emotional connection thing that seems like it doesn't necessarily matter if you get stares when you walk down the street, or your friends who stayed in their unhappy marriages look down upon you. You're just like, no, I'm going to get my basic needs met, and I'm going to feel secure and comfort as I descend into old age, because I'm going to have this younger person taking care of me. Is there any that's a big part of why these dudes do this, right? And they suffer all the shame and indignation that comes with such a situation.
Well, similarly to people who are in cults, I think these people have a habit of perpetually lying to themselves to convince themselves they're making the right choice, that they're not wrong, everyone else is wrong. So if you're that lonely and you've had no success in your whole country, in your home country, I mean, these people are sold the image of like the subservient, traditional, feminine Eastern European woman. You know, she'll take care of you, she'll raise children, she'll be a housewife, she'll cook, she won't have feminist ideals. That, you know, to these men, that sounds great. It's like, yes, I get it. You know, it was a mistake wasting my time with women in my own country. Like, this is what I need. But that's not a real person. That's an idea. And, you know, these people are flesh and blood. And even if, like, that person you were spending money to chat with online, it's like, holy shit, she actually is the girl from the photo. I wasn't duped. I mean, if you're anything like me, you could meet someone who's super attractive and hate them within minutes just hearing the way they speak. Like, you know what I mean? I mean, that happens. And imagine if you're already committed, it's like, oh, fuck, like I've just agreed to like let this person live with me for 90 days in the US as my fiance. But I guess when you reach a certain level of loneliness and desperation, you find a way to twist that into your head to be like, well, no, it's gonna work. It's gonna work.
I listened to a fascinating podcast yesterday on Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast, where he had this British writer on, where he's written a book about status and the role it kind of plays in our lives. It was lots of ideas similar to this Alain de Botton doco from years ago called Status Anxiety. I have mixed feelings about Alain de Botton, but it's kind of similar things in that it's not because of like social media, comparison culture, the concept of like status in our world has never been more prevalent. And he gave some really interesting accounts of like hunter-gatherer groups where we have this idea of like it being an egalitarian society and kind of like no status, everyone is equal. And he said that wasn't the case. It was like everyone had a role, and because you were good at your particular role, that gave you status. But if you kind of tried to overstep your mark and say that you were better than what you were, then you would kind of be like, there was an effective self-correcting mechanism within hunter-gatherer groups where they could kind of intimidate you and curb your enthusiasm so you'd get back into line. And often that would mean like so outcasting people or like fucking killing them or whatever. So we have this like hundreds of thousands of years of programming to care about our status and how we fit into society at large. He says no one's necessarily susceptible to it because like Beyonce probably feels status anxiety when she hangs out with fucking Meghan Markle and Prince fucking Harry because they come from a royal bloodline. So Elon Musk probably gets woozy at the knees when he meets his latest anime manic pixie dream girl and freaks out. And so it happens to everyone. And he said that the reason that happens is that we have a tendency in our own minds to portray ourselves as the hero in our own story, and we have a really powerful ability to overlook or ignore instances where we fuck up and step out of line, and then we can turn our triumphs or very minor triumphs into like Hollywood epic achievements. And so I think about these middle-aged guys and perhaps them overlooking the fact that the person that they've got, they can't stand their personality, even though they're beautiful, or maybe it's the feeling is mutual of disgust. And there is this kind of this they're like, well, yeah, I've got a trophy wife, and sure, she hates my fucking guts at the moment, my literal fat fucking guts, waist size 58 guts. But I'm a fucking she'll figure me out eventually. I am a really nice guy. Like I really do know how to complete every game, every version of Crash Bandicoot. And she'll see that there's some extreme value in that. And so I think that that's perhaps it, is that guys aren't that stupid. Those middle-aged guys, they understand that in the beginning it's pretty much an untenable situation, but they have an unrealistic expectation or belief that they'll be able to turn the tide over time with these women.
You know, once upon a time, like right when the Soviet Union fell, it might have been true that like gorgeous Angelina Jolie looking women were desperate for any Western man. It didn't matter as long as he had $10 in his pocket and like didn't completely look like an ape, then anything goes. However, things have changed, and in Eastern Europe, like there might be problems, but men there tend to care a lot more about appearance than men in the West do. You're not gonna see guys wearing, fucking sweatpants when they go out. Like people really dress up, men and women both. And men are making money over there now and working hard and hustling. It's all about that hustle, grind culture and whatnot. So those women are like, well, fuck, like this guy's hot. He's living next door, or we went to school together. Because that happens often too. People get married quite young over there, and often it's people they went to high school or elementary school with. So that need to be saved by like this Westerner with $10 doesn't really exist anymore. That's more so for just like village bumpkins and peasants who really have nothing going on, and they're desperate just to leave their fucking village, to do something. And so they're not going to look like Angelina Jolie. They're going to look like a simple peasant girl.
Hiding from the farm. Yeah.
Yeah, I like peasant girls, but like that's what you're going to get. So the American coming to Ukraine thinking he's going to get a 10 out of 10 Angelina Jolie, that's not happening. Like, unless you're Matthew McConaughey or Brad Pitt yourself, which you are not. And that's something I want to see. I want to see the one instance of a Miller to Bride success story where the man looks like Brad Pitt and the woman looks like Angelina Jolie, and they lived happily ever after. But that has not happened, and I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah, that's kind of a perfect example of status working against those men, because they don't bring any status really. They just bring money. And the guy that she grew up with, who is earning like 5% of what the American dude is, but has like a cool group of friends and is respected, in their little community, he has way more status. So I think that is the mismatch or the thing that those dudes are potentially overlooking in the kind of like equation here. But I definitely try to remain open-minded about it, because I feel like when my buddies started getting married, as you kind of alluded to before, you were like, people just generally end up getting married to the people that they grew up near, went to school with, work with, meet in the first few years of school. And that's pretty much consistent everywhere in the world. And so my friends started getting married, and I started having this kind of, I'm not sure if you would call it like an insidious thought, but I was just like, I was like, okay, all my 10, and I was like, the first marriages were so predictable. I was like, oh yeah, you're getting engaged, well done. No one saw that coming. Like, but then I was like, it's the second round of marriages. That's the ones that I'm really looking forward to. Just the wild card arrangements where it's like, whoa, you divorced Cindy and you're getting back together with your high school girlfriend. How the fuck did that happen? Like there's actually going to be some interesting stories as opposed to the bog standard kind of like, oh yeah, we grew up together or we worked together stories. And yeah, I imagine that there will be some situations there where, as I get into my middle age, people I know will do that. And I because yeah, it's this strange thing where, for example, with like vegetarianism or veganism, where you could try and make yourself Jesus on the cross and be like, I want to change the world, and your taste buds don't like the vegetarian or vegan food, but you're trying to change the world. And then there's the other person who's just eating fucking juicy burgers every night, who intellectually understands it's not the right thing to do, but they're like, well, I'm going to be on this earth for 85 years if I'm lucky. I'm gonna satiate my senses and have a good time and yeah, just fucking let it all hang out while I'm here. And I don't know, there is something about that where I'm like, if you're not changing the world, why are you trying to set an example for, like with the male, equivocating that to mail order brides? It's like, okay, unless you're going to find a way to make the world equal in terms of GDP across every country, so that there isn't kind of like a marriage economical arbitrage industry, why the fuck not get a younger, hotter bride? Because like I said before, that there is this assumption that, yeah, she doesn't like me now, but she will eventually. I know a lot of guys in middle age where they do kind of have marriages of convenience with women from their own home countries. And I'm like, you don't seem to really like each other that much. Not like newlyweds or young couples in their 20s really are infatuated with one another anyway. And there seems to be kind of like this implied assumption that both of them will hopefully fall in love with each other eventually anyway. So why not just get someone where there is a slight language barrier, but they're younger and hotter and potentially more willing to try and make the relationship work anyway? That's the little door, as opposed to just slamming the door shut and saying, no, it's fucking disgusting. It's dirty old men, just get beaten off by the ratchet hoe. Surely there's got to be some. I don't think this is going away. Is what my I guess thought here is. So I'm trying to kind of make peace with the idea and try and gain some perspective on how it could possibly work in some situations.
Well, it's not going away because loneliness isn't going away. And I think loneliness is only going to increase as time goes on. And we will get to like what I want to see like in a movie about this at some point. But speaking about marriage and status, I just had a thought pop in my head because I'm in Japan at the moment. So before coming to Japan, I was reading a lot of books, literature based in Japan from Japanese writers. And one thing I kept noticing again and again was just how frequent cheating was and how nonchalant they kind of seemed about it. But it was almost always cheating on the woman's part, the wife's part. And there was never really a sense of guilt. It just kind of happened. And this obviously doesn't apply to anyone, but Japan is a very status obsessed country. Your status really, really means something. And like the way you present yourself and how you relate to those above you and, how you relate within the hierarchy, that stuff matters. And people get married out of convenience, not necessarily out of love. They get married because that's what's expected. And, the average man, he works 12, 13 hours a day, and he has a 1 hour commute to work. So that means he's up at 5 in the morning. And then once work is over, the boss says, all right, we're getting drinks, and you're not allowed to say no to your boss. That's your boss. So you're not home until midnight, 1 in the morning. So you do not see your wife in your waking hours. There's little to no intimacy. And so the wife, she's like, well, fuck that. I want to get laid. And my husband, is useless. I'm not going to get it from him. And so that kind of gives them the go ahead to cheat. And that's why it always seems to be like from the women's perspective, at least in the books that I've read. And that's not really connected to this mail order bride thing, but that was just a thought I had when you were mentioning status. But about the movie, let's talk about the movie.
Yeah. I've spaced on the fact that this is ostensibly meant to be at least partially a movie podcast. So yeah, tell me about your concept, because reading these stories, I had some vague ideas, but I couldn't really see a story. So I'm curious about what you would put together based on all this shit.
So I like when a certain genre really utilizes its format. Like some stories are better served as documentaries rather than fiction or vice versa. And I think that kind of explains why we really haven't seen many, at least good mail order bride stories in cinema. There's great documentaries about them, but I think with the documentaries, as cringy and intimate and revealing as they are, they cut off at a certain point because with the camera crew there, we never truly see the couples alone. We don't see those interactions. And I think a movie would allow you to see that, which is like, I love secondhand cringe and embarrassment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Curb Your Enthusiasm is such a popular show, you know? Like, I live for that shit. But at the same time, I'm also super interested in the people behind the scenes, the people who run these businesses and make money off of it. Similarly to cult leaders, I'm also obsessed with scam artists, like people who get away with it. Like it should be criminal, but they're, you know, if there's a way to make money off of something, people will find a way. They will monopolize it, and they will they will take advantage of people's loneliness. And hey, man, I can't really fault them. They're getting paid, and I think this movie, I wouldn't really give it a typical narrative structure. It'd kind of be like a slice of life where the camera focuses on one aspect of it. Maybe for 30 minutes, you're following the organizer, the guy who organizes the tours. He makes the money. He runs the website, and you see what his day-to-day life is. And then the camera switches, and you're some old guy in his third marriage who's on the tour in some small Ukrainian town going on the speed dating with these women. And then the camera focuses to the woman's point of view. You see her day from her village and why she might want to escape that. And it wouldn't demonize anyone. It wouldn't glorify anyone. You're just seeing the people. And some moments could be really funny, you know, even cute. But then you could get horror elements. Like in one of the articles I sent you, there was a man who killed his mail order bride. And I believe his name was Indel King. I mean, that just sounds like the name of a Silence of the Lambs inmate type character.
Yeah.
Indel King.
Well, yeah, like the kind of the one consistency with all those stories is that the kind of both sides were getting fucked over in alternating. Sometimes it was the man, sometimes it was the lady. To be honest, it was more often than not the lady. But I was thinking like a common kind of theme there could be kind of the need for revenge. So that there could potentially be a story where, let's say, a mail order bride goes over to the States, lives with someone very kind of controlling and manipulating. He kills her. She's dead now. He goes to jail. And then on that same kind of like Kontiki tour around Kyiv, there's the kind of rotund video gamer guy who drops thousands of bucks just emailing these chicks and then gets screwed over. So the poor Eastern European woman who's been murdered and her family are victims, and so is like one of the other American men in this situation. Let's make him the rotund Crash Bandicoot gamer guy. If they hooked up together, they were like, let's fucking murder the tour operator, the slimy guy who, yeah. And so I was thinking there's a potential like Ridley Scott action revenge film or something where the gamer guy flies back over and then, yeah, connects with the Eastern European family and finds a way to kind of kidnap and kill like the guy who kind of facilitated the murder and the extortion of the Bandicoot guy. Potentially some type of like weird connection between two sides where in another instance has fucked each other over, but there's a mutually agreed upon enemy in that situation. So that's potentially
Yeah, I mean,
a more kind of straight up
with
and
it.
down action movie.
Why not go weird with it? And another thing that drives me insane, a lot of movies want to take place in like Ukraine or Russia and have Ukrainian and Russian characters, but they never want to film there or like utilize any of it or use people actually from there. And most people probably don't give a shit, but I notice. And it's like there's so much like great scenery to work with and just like great infrastructure and locations you could use and interesting faces and characters that really, settings aren't arbitrary. You can't just film in fucking Toronto and tag Kiev over the top and like, oh, it's Kiev now. Like I think location matters and the people matter and the language matters. And it's just such a filmable cinematic place. And I think that's like kind of an untapped place to make good quality movies.
Yeah, I really dig what you say about the fact that the cameras are on in those documentaries, kind of like a Louis Theroux type of situation where he does a pretty good job of getting into some areas of the weirdness and the awkwardness, but you never feel like you're getting the full story. So I think a feature film would allow you to do that. And I think beyond the mail order bride relationship, there's also an opportunity to explore, like, let's say American society at large, because you've got the middle-aged guy, assuming he's got like a few buddies who've kept their original wives, and so they've been married for like 30 years. He's the only divorced guy, so you can kind of see the dynamic there of like these men, some who are probably like looking down upon their nose at him for like, why would you do that? This is awkward. Why are you bringing your young wife to our like group dinners? And then yeah, there's maybe some others who are like jealous of him, like, oh, I fucking hate my wife. I wish I could do what you. So it would be kind of like a cool way to shine a light on outward on the kind of societies they're entering as well, and then potentially also look at. You could almost have like an Uncle Tom type of character where it would be like a mail order bride who goes over there. A young mail order bride. She's miserable, but then she gets introduced to like a mail order bride who's been married to some dude for like 10 years. And she's just like learned to like grin her teeth and bear it. And she's like encouraging the young mail order bride to just like, yeah, I know sex isn't very pleasant, but just think of something else. Think of Dimitri back in the home country while he's rolling on top of you with his Doritos breath. So you could have these interesting characters around the relationship as well.
I'm picturing the one-legged Russian from The Sopranos that Tony hooks up with, the one who's smoking. That's exactly what I'm picturing as like the seasoned veteran who's telling the younger classmen what's what.
Yeah, because with the like other middle-aged characters, I've noticed this. I've started kind of going to this running club here each week in Atlanta, and you meet like all random types of people, and some people who are a bit older, and some people I've worked with over the years, and just kind of like seeing their social media output or just talking to them about their life is pretty interesting, because I think that in the first part of your life there is a kind of like an intent or a kind of desire to understand yourself and to make yourself the best version that you possibly can be, and do all this kind of like self-awareness bullshit. But then once people hit the second part of their life, there is just an emphasis on doing things where it's like, I'm not going to be here for very long anymore. So I think that's why older people can be kind of cool sometimes, and like they don't freak out over certain things, because they're just like, well, I just want to see a bunch of shit before I die. And there is something kind of there is something kind of like reassuring, and it kind of like lowers the stakes a little bit. I think we're kind of hung up on like our relationships and now kind of like how we're fitting in with the world, all that status stuff. But I think once you kind of like, particularly men, I think once they get into the second part of life, they're like, fuck it, I'm not perfect, my wife isn't perfect, my life isn't perfect, but you can kind of appreciate what you've got and just do things before you fucking die. And I think that's kind of something to look forward to. And yeah, I wonder if it's going to happen for me personally. I definitely don't feel like I'm anything close to that, but it's something that I swear I'm observing for people around this age who might be kind of thinking about dabbling in the mail order bride game.
See, I was gonna say, I think that old man mentality, that old man soul, hit me at like 25, so I'm there already. I'm just, it's smooth sailing from here on out.
And what about like loneliness? The kind of you, because I think that like I still haven't read SCHLOCK, forgive me, but I'll be getting around to that hopefully on this vacation. But CoinciDATE, at least, like loneliness is a huge kind of theme there, and the ways in which people kind of try and deal with it. How are we doing globally with the concept of loneliness? Are apps bringing us closer together? Or are they wedging us apart? Please enlighten me.
This is going to be because I'm the expert, I will. This is going to be a very long-winded analogy. But I recently finished a book, and I've been reading one, and I've been trying to explain to friends that it was very boring, like incredibly dull, and I loved it. I think there's such a thing as good boring and bad boring. There's still boring, but you could enjoy boring. And did you ever watch any of the old Star Trek shows?
Yeah, I think I used to catch a couple when they were on TV back in the day, but I never made an effort of watching the whole thing.
So by today's standards, like they just wouldn't cut the mustard. They're very slow paced. Like the most exciting thing is occasionally a laser will hit the cabin of the ship and it might shake a little. It's like, oh my God, stabilize, and like that's kind of it. But I love that shit. I don't need everything to be this ADHD action packed camera spinning around thing. Sometimes that is enough, and like the cheesy dialogue and them using their cheap props to observe a planet. That, like, I love that shit. And so the connection with apps, I think they're a great way to bring people together, and also terrible in terms of like exacerbating the loneliness epidemic. I think it's doing both at the same time. And I think there's no like mathematical formula to figure out when it will do which or what your outcome will be. It's fucked. I mean, I've had, how do I say this? Like, I've connected with some really cool people all over the world thanks to apps. And I've also dealt with some fucking bullshit thanks to apps. And I think when you're already in a really lonely state, the slightest thing that happens, it feels 10 times worse than it might actually be, because it's just one thing piled on top of another. So I think one of the problems we have, and I don't want to be accused of like the guy defending incels, I'm not, but we really do, we live in like a time period where we say we want to promote mental health and empathy and all that, but the moment like there's a story, and I'm not even talking about a shooter, but just like a man talking about how hard his life is, how he's lonely, he can't date, the immediate like mainstream reaction seems to be to scoff at that guy and laugh like fucking white boy first world problems or shit like that, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, that guy might actually really be hurting, and like the fact that our gut reaction is just to laugh it off and say, oh, his problems don't matter, they're not real problems, like fucking get over it. That sucks. That's a shitty mentality to have.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is, but there's this guy Andrew Tate. He recently got banned across every platform.
As of last weekend, familiar.
Yeah. Well, it's bizarre because I think that I was maybe like the last wave of notoriety I caught the last wave of his notoriety maybe like 3 months before his banning. So I started kind of like hate watching some of his content, and I learned a little bit about his model in respect to like this guy has been trying to get famous for like the last 15 years, where he's been on reality shows in the UK for a long time. He was on Big Brother like 5 years ago, and he eventually spun off into like a men's support group, kind of like an empowerment, join my masterclass type of thing and pay $50 a month to hear my lectures and all that shit. And he had a model where he was encouraging his members, thousands of like young dudes looking for direction, kind of like a male role model, to share his clips on YouTube and TikTok. And because he was getting like all this, it wasn't just his own channels pumping out his content, it was all these like thousands. It like kind of snowballed and helped the algorithm. So in that respect, fucking genius marketer, in that he was able to kind of like harness this. He was earning money off these guys already, and then he was like using them as his kind of like content proliferators in the same breath. So fucking clever dude in that respect. But yeah, he's one of those guys. It's kind of like he's just like Dan Bilzerian 2.0, but he's more eloquent, and he's like Dan Bilzerian crossed with Jordan Peterson a little bit. But I guess one thing that I found through like discovering him and hearing some of the heinous shit that he was saying on podcasts is that there's always an element of truth in what these guys are saying, in the advice that they're giving lonely young men, in that like until you develop a bit of swag or status yourself, it's hard for women to see you as attractive. And just when young men in particular are in those kind of like circling the drain moments of kind of self-pity and depression, it's hard for them to get a clear understanding of why, in what world they would be attractive to the opposite sex. So he's basically saying, yeah, like get your shit together, try and earn a bit of money, like try and look better and all that stuff. But he takes it to the extreme of like, you should fucking hit women and they should know your place. Yeah. Doesn't matter if I'm unfaithful. She needs to be faithful. She can't even talk to another man. He's basically bringing, I believe he lives in Eastern Europe. So he's bringing like a weird kind of like Russian, and he also spends time in like the Middle East. So kind of like Sharia law combined with kind of like the traditional Russian values type of approach, which is gaining a lot of kind of like popularity, those kind of traditional values, at least in some circles online. And so I was watching this stuff and I was like, it's bizarre because there are like, you maybe need a guy like that to give you a push in the right direction if you're a lonely incel, and then you need to get off the ride basically immediately after that. Otherwise, you could very easily become manipulated and go way down the rabbit hole and become a violent misogynist. But I can definitely see if there is a lack of good male role models in your life, someone like that giving you some ideas about how to improve yourself, and then you've got to fucking bail and take it, figure it out yourself from there.
Well, that really is the problem, isn't it? Like people like that could say 2 or 3 good ideas in a row, and you're like, I'm on board with that. I like that. That sounds pretty good. And then they talk about beating women, and it's like, oh, well, why do you have to do that? Why is it so often that there's that connection between wanting to help men and like improve their confidence and also like fucking hating women? It's like those don't have to be mutually exclusive. You could like women and like respect them and want to treat them right and also want to make your life better. But it seems like an easy tactic. Again, it's easier to manipulate people and get people to do what you want when you piss them off and when you rile them up and play on their angry emotions.
I just feel like anyone on the internet who has any notoriety or following, I don't see them as real people either. I see them as they're playing a character. They're an avatar of certain ideas versus a real person that you could actually talk to in a bar. And I feel like, at least when I was younger, and I believe that podcasting and YouTube to a lesser extent, I feel like the origins were a bit more organic and kind of like homespun and kind of like people were just kind of like they would talk to you like you were at a bar. But I guess as the landscape has become more competitive and trying to get ears or clicks, it requires more kind of like bombastic statements that they're going to make your audience more sticky. So I just don't understand anyone who hears something on a podcast, whether it be about vaccines or Joe Biden or fucking how to date, and then you go and walk away and say like, oh, not only just like take it as gospel, but like I'm now going to start implementing that in my life. Like it's something that you should like maybe chew on and be like, oh, that's interesting. It's funny he said it in that way. It was entertaining or hilarious the way he said it. But it kind of should stop there. If you're interested, maybe you should do some follow-up research or reading. But I feel like so many people just like, yeah, I'm going to take it and run with it because as if this person knows exactly the situation in my life and how to fix me, even though they've never fucking met me and they really care about their YouTube metrics.
Well, especially when you oh man, where do I even start? If we talk about the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, he blew up and then he kind of disappeared. He had that medical thing, and now he's back, baby. He's back.
Yeah.
But he's been like crying in his past like 5 interviews he's done, and like he just sets himself off with arbitrary words, and he'll just start crying. It's like, this is the dude these guys used to worship. Like that's why you have to be careful when someone becomes a caricature of themselves, like Jordan Peterson has. Like I was never a fan or not a fan. I didn't care. I think he had some interesting things to say, and I also thought he had some pretty dumbass opinions. But recently, it's like, oh man, this guy's become a clown. I forgot whose podcast he was on, but they were talking about matter. He was like, and matters, and that's beautiful. And he started crying. I was like, what is this like faux profound, like 14-year-old Def Jam poetry bullshit that you're crying over, dude?
Well, he's potentially the most interesting out of the whole kind of intellectual dark web collection of misfits because of his complete lack of awareness. Like the other ones, as I kind of alluded to, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, even Sam Harris and Joe Rogan, I think they understand that they're playing a role, and the way in which they present themselves needs to be kind of packaged for their audience and their version of content that they want to create. Whereas I think Jordan Peterson is more of kind of like an artist. I wouldn't call him a good artist, but I'd say he's kind of like he loves meandering and just word salad and just kind of like weird pastiche of old philosophy and kind of new age junk bullshit and kind of just like letting it all hang out. And he recently joined, is it called the Daily Wire, Shapiro's conservative network? And he's like, I'm back, baby. Of the as like their like one of their stalwart writers or fucking talking heads. But anyway, there's this podcast I listened to called Decoding the Gurus, and they made a good point about Jordan Peterson, where they were like, he is just someone who likes conservative fascist values, but he's kind of not even aware of that. Like he did this like a message for young men where he's talking about like dedicate yourself to your family and country. I know my Peterson's bad. I think Tim Dillon does the funniest.
Your Peterson is like No, dude. Your Peterson is like post like weird sabbatical in Russia Operation Peterson.
Yeah, lobotomized Peterson. Yeah, anyway, he was basically, he did this fucking weird 5-minute video where it's like what young men should do, like how they can get, and he basically just he gave like the bullet points of the Hitler Youth Manifesto, but with a straight face, because I don't feel like he is a fascist or wants a race war or whatever, but he just doesn't connect the dots that what he believes in has been utilized by some really hardcore fascist leaders in the past. And the fact that he wears suits all the time and has an authoritarian or an attempt of authoritarian glare on his face when he delivered this with his fucking Kermit voice, he doesn't realize the obvious parallel that you can draw between the fucking Nazis and what he's saying. And so, yeah, I'm not going to fall victim to the own point I made where Decoding the Gurus guys said this, and I didn't take it as fact. I was just like, yeah, that's an interesting thing that I'd never really considered about Peterson, is that I think he's so high on his own supply and kind of like a zealot in respect to how the puritanical way in which he sees the world. He doesn't kind of get, he's like an incel in that he doesn't understand how people are seeing him from the outside, and therefore it's just going to be cringe galore. He's the gift that keeps on giving for the next 5 years until his next Benzo issue. There's just going to be ongoing funny stuff coming out of that guy's mouth.
Have you seen his daughter's book cover with him on the cover? So his daughter wrote a book. I think it's her meat diet, that bullshit meat diet
meat queen.
That they were both
on. They call her. Yeah.
And oh my god, I can't, words can't describe it, but it's like a very, very badly photoshopped book cover, and the two of them are walking on the beach together, and it looks sexual. Like whenever she talks about
my dad,
I get the weirdest vibe. You know, I decided that Michaela's going to be my new bride, and we're going to eat together, and we're going to clean our rooms. And it is so bizarre. I'll have to show you it, because like me just talking about it isn't going to do it justice. But it's weird that, first of all, intellectual dark web is a very dorky edgelord name. And I think Sam Harris said as much, though. I want to point out, because Sam Harris, of that like crew, is the only one who didn't end up being like a weird right-wing nut job. I don't know if you know who the Weinstein brothers are.
Oh,
Eric
dude,
and Brett.
yeah, no, I'm obsessed. Again, Decoding the Gurus, they call it Weinstein World, where for a while, every episode they were just doing a touching base with the weird and wacky world of the Weinsteins. And the moment where, I'm not sure if you ever saw it, where Eric, the one with kind of the Jew fro, he went on Rogan and he announced live on there that he bought the domain pull that shit up, Jamie.com, and he kind of just oh my god, and that might be my favorite cringe moment ever. Just in respect to like completely missing the mark of not understanding the ramifications of that, and that I couldn't actually get through that whole episode because I'm a connoisseur of cringe content, but that was too acute and too painful to watch all the way through. But I've seen bits parts of it.
You know, like a bona fide retarded person was like telling Weinstein, who's supposed to be an intellectual, like, dude, the way you're trying to describe this like theory or equation is horseshit. Like, we've been going on for 40 minutes. This is like dead air. No one's listening to this shit. But his brother, Brett, I remember initially thinking, oh, this guy seems pretty reasonable and has some like interesting things to say. Holy shit, did he switch sides like the moment he got the smallest modicum of fame and attention from the right-wing crowd. And what a clown. Like, I don't really want to dwell too much on that guy, but what a fucking clown. From that group, Sam Harris is the only one who I still find like respectable.
Yeah, me too. And Sam Harris got in trouble they were trying to cancel him on Twitter for what he said about Hunter Biden. I couldn't care if Hunter Biden had dead children in his basement or some shit on his laptop. Where he took it to the nth degree, and I understood what he was saying. He was basically saying that like the greater threat was if Trump gets a second term, then it could mean like World War III is my understanding of his position on the Hunter Biden laptop situation. And so you, in a kind of thinking about the greater good, you try and eliminate the greatest risk first, and then you tend to the bodies in the basement. But yeah, I guess with the one caveat I would say with kind of like lampooning or kind of laughing at all these kind of intellectual dark web dummies, that my whole take on it was the intellectual dark web was just a bunch of middle-aged men coming to grips with the fact that they were conservative. Like I always just found it hilarious. They all presented themselves as like, oh no, we're classical liberal. They always kept saying I'm classically liberal. I was like, oh, so that translates to conservative. I'm pretty sure now, because
exactly.
They were trying to have their cake and eat it, and basically saying, oh, we're not Republicans, but we're just really against all the woke shit that the left is doing right now. But at a certain point, I think you just need to fucking come out of the closet and say, yeah, I'm right wing, and maybe yeah, but there's so much stigma attached with that. But the one caveat I would say with all this stuff is that it's kind of easy for us to be edgelords and talk like no one's listening, because for all intents and purposes, kind of no one is right now with me and you. And I try and think about like, okay, yeah, that I want to be entertaining and try and say something of interest, but I also don't want to start saying shit that I don't believe in or I feel like is outside of my realm of stuff that I should be talking about. But there is the added complication. If things blow up, do you feel like you have enough fortitude to stick to your guns and stay in your lane and stick with what you think is cool, kind of like pull a Doug Stanhope, just like bail on Hollywood and move to Arizona and live in a weird, wherever the fuck Bisbee, Arizona, live in a weird fucking trailer park town and just so you can be pure for your art? Or will you be like Brett Weinstein, where you be like, oh, I lost my academia job and now, holy shit, I got 5,000 more Instagram followers after my second Joe Rogan appearance. Maybe I could double. Like, how does, like ambition, I think, is a very weird human trait, because it can help you. It can like water your garden and it can help grow your creative pursuits or kind of like the best things about your life, or it can fucking poison absolutely everything. And then you end up not recognizing yourself one day. So I think until you're in that situation and then you do have the opportunity to kind of like blossom into kind of like a monster, you're not real. It's very difficult to know whether you'd be able to maintain your sanity until you're in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, luckily, I don't want to speak for you, but luckily for me, I'm broke as a joke and will never have to worry about that, because I matter so little that even if I said something so outrageous, they'd be like, all right. Like, it wouldn't matter. There'd be no implications. There'd be no like lasting consequences of my actions. I would like to think that if like my voice actually mattered and if I had a blue check mark, that I'd stick to my guns. But I also don't think I'd ever say anything so outrageous or so controversial, because I don't think anything we've said in any of our podcasts are like that ridiculous. Like I think we've said some pretty reasonable things, and our views on things are quite nuanced and reasonable. And if anyone takes issue with that, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
They're allowed to do that. And I think I would stick to my guns, mostly because it's not my intention to purposely upset anyone. I'm not out to troll the libs or to own the libs. It's not my intention. But if I ever felt there's a moment where I stepped out of line or I was wrong, I'll be the first to admit that.
Yeah. I think about the whole creative. I have kind of an enforced perspective of having zero expectations when it comes to creative work. Like the guy from the Queens of the Stone Age, Josh Homme. He's in a bunch of trouble now for some bad shit he did allegedly, but he talked about with his music. He said, like, what advice would you give anyone? He says, yeah, expect nothing, because I think that if you go in with any expectations, you are going to be pandering to an audience, to an imagined audience. You're going to sell out at the first opportunity. You're going to like take shortcuts. Whereas if you're just like, I don't need anything from this, or I don't expect anything back. I'm going to like throw myself into my work and like do the best job I possibly can, but I'm not going to like set up a dynamic in my life where it's like, okay, I'm going to release my next YouTube video is going to be even more outrageously egregious claims about vaccines in my next YouTube video, because I need that potential bump in subs that's going to lead me to like more money. Like if you're in that position, you're fucked, because you're just going to be constantly. So I feel like it's, I don't know, with my whole ambition and stuff like that, it's kind of a Fred Durst approach, my way or the highway. Like I've got to, it's either gonna fucking work with me making zero compromises, and if it doesn't work, then that's fine. I'm gonna have a great life regardless.
Because yeah, man, at the end of the day, your head is the one you're stuck with. Like you're always gonna be stuck with your own inner thoughts. And the worst thing you could do is not be true to those. As cheesy and like banal as that sounds, like that really is like how things are. And also, like, as shitty as things get, I just constantly remind myself, we're all going to be dead anyways. That guy's going to be dead. That guy's going to be dead. I'm going to be dead. This legit doesn't matter. So don't get upset over those little petty things.
Oprah Winfrey's at the funeral home. You get a death. You get a death. You get a death.
Watch me be like the one unlucky son of a bitch who doesn't die. Like after saying all this, it's like, haha, dumbass.
Yeah, baby, take them vitamin pills. All right, man. I think we did it. Yeah, fuck the intellectual dark web. There's some new kids in town. We tell it to you straight. All right. Till next time.